Okay. Okay, I'll start now. Where are we? Yeah, here. 19. Okay, just give me a minute. Haribol,
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
how many of you tried this password that I gave just now?
I once tried it and it works immediately.
Then why Narayan Padmanabh was saying that it doesn't work?
I don't know. Maybe he,
I think Gopal Shankar was also. Well, it's not connected. Just give me a minute. I don't know what to do now other than. Okay, anyway, let's just get on. Otherwise, it's never ending. Okay, that is it here. 4.19 to 5.19 is today. Narayan Padmanabh was saying the same thing. Oh no, Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Somebody said something on chat. Ashwita was saying password works. Okay. Chaturhotram karma shuddham. Prajanam vikshya vaidikam. Vyadadha yagya santatyai. Vedamekam chaturvidham. We saw that the sacrifices mentioned in the Vedas were the means by which the people's occupations could be purified. And to simplify the process, he divided the one Veda into 4 in order to expand them among men. Okay, so he divided uh, the Vedas into 4 because there are 4 priests. Chaturhotri, they are called. Here, Chaturhotram Karma Shuddham Prajanam Vikshya Vaidikam. Krishna Chakravarti Thakur has remarked that for those who are not fixed on the pathway of jnana, yoga, and bhakti, karma is what is prescribed as the means to purify. Let me see. Okay, the Veda was divided into 4 divisions of sacrifice just to purify the occupation service of the 4 orders. The idea is that if one does not purify his occupation by engaging in Vedic dharma, he will never become purified. He will never become purified from lust, anger, greed. He will never develop the qualification required to understand anything higher than whatever he perceives through his senses. Prabhupada also takes the opportunity to talk about the 5th Veda, which refers to the Itihasas, Puranas, and so on. About the 4 Vedas, namely Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva, there are the Puranas, the Mahabharata, Samhitas, etc., which are known as the 5th Veda. Sri Vyasadeva and his many disciples were all historical personalities, and they were very kind and sympathetic toward the fallen souls of this age of Kali. There is no point in doubting the authority of the Puranas and Mahabharata as parts and parcels of the Veda. In the Chandogya Upanishad, the Puranas and Mahabharata, generally known as histories, are mentioned as the fifth Veda. The Chandogya Upanishad explicitly states Vedanam Panchamam. Itihasas and Puranas are the fifth Veda. So fifth means that it is different from the four. It is not contained within the four. It is separate. But nevertheless, it belongs to the same genre. And therefore, it is counted as the fifth. In Tattva Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami indicates that when you talk about 5 fingers, it means that the 5 fingers are in some manner so similar that they are grouped together as 5. The 5th finger cannot be a part of any of the 4 fingers. It has to be a separate one. Otherwise, you can't count it as 5th. ऋग यजु सामाथर्वाख्या वेदाश्चत्वारो उद्धृता इतिहास पुराणं च पंचमो वेद उच्यते. The 4 divisions of the original sources of knowledge, the Vedas, were made separately. But the historical facts and authentic stories mentioned in the Puranas are called the 5th Veda. चातुर्विध्यमेवाह ऋग्गिति उद्धृता पृथक्कृता तत्र वेदधरः पैलः सामगो जैमिनिः कविः वैशम्पायन एवैको निष्णातो यजुषामुत. After the Vedas were divided into 4 divisions, Paila Rishi became the professor of the Rig Veda, Jaimini the professor of the Samaveda, and Vaishampayana alone became glorified by the Yajur Veda. The different Vedas were entrusted to different learned scholars for development in various ways. This subject also appears in the 12th canto with some more details. Atharvangirasamaasit sumantur daruno munihi itihasa purananam pitame romaharshanaha. The Sumantu Muni, Angira, was very devotedly engaged, was entrusted with the Atharva Veda. And my father, Romaharshana, was entrusted with the Puranas and historical records. Darunaha. The word Darunaha indicates that the sage Akrura was cruel because he engaged in certain activities of violence, abhichara, which are allowed in Atharva Veda. There are some ways by which one can commit violence using certain Vedic mantras and procedures. So because Angira had used them, therefore he is referred to by the expression Daruna. Daruna also means seriously devoted, but it has another connotation. It means cruel. तएतर्षयो वेदं स्वं स्वं व्यस्यन्ननेकधा शिष्यै प्रशिष्यैस्तच्छिष्यैर्वेदास्ते शाखिनो भवन्. All these learned scholars in their turn rendered their entrusted Vedas unto their many disciples, grand disciples and great grand disciples, and thus the respective branches of the followers of the Vedas came into being. There are no branches of knowledge, either mundane or transcendental, which do not belong to the original text of the Vedas. They have simply been developed into different branches. They were originally rendered by great, respectable, and learned professors. So Vedic knowledge was distributed all over the world through different disciplic successions. No one, therefore, can claim independent knowledge beyond the Vedas, independent objective knowledge. एव वेदातुर्मेधैर् धार्यन्ते पुरुषैर्यथा एवं चकार भगवान् व्यासः Kripanavatsalah. Thus the great sage Vyasadeva. Where is this? Thus the great sage Vyasadeva, who was very kind to the ignorant masses, edited the Vedas so that they might be assimilated by less intellectual men. Edited the Vedas means he arranged the Vedas. He reorganized the texts of the Veda. Veda Vibhaga Prayojanamaha. The purpose is being stated here. He wanted that Vedic knowledge should be assimilated by less intellectual people. That Vedic knowledge, which previously was only assimilated by extremely intelligent people, he wanted this to be made understandable by less intelligent, the typical people of Kali Yuga. The seed of all knowledge, or the Veda, is not a subject matter which can be easily understood by any ordinary man. There's a stricture that no one should try to learn the Vedas who is not a qualified Brahmana. This stricture has been wrongly interpreted in so many ways. A class of men who claim Brahmanical qualifications simply by their birthright in the family of a Brahmana claim that the study of the Vedas is a monopoly of the Brahmana caste only. Another section of the people take this as an injustice to members of other castes who do not happen to take birth in a Brahman family. But both of them are misguided. The Vedas are subjects which have to be explained even to Brahmaji by the Supreme Lord. Therefore, the subject matter is understood by persons with exceptional qualities of goodness. Persons who are in the modes of passion and ignorance are unable to understand the subject matter of the Vedas. The ultimate goal of Vedic knowledge is Sri Krishna, the personality of God. This personality is very rarely understood by those who are in the modes of passion and ignorance. So Vyasadeva, considering the less intelligent population of Kali Yuga, divided the Vedas. He restructured the content of the Vedas in such a manner that they can understand. Stri Shudra Dvijavandhunam Trayena Shrutikochara Karma Shreyasi Mudhanam Shrey Evam Bhavediha Iti Bharatamakhyanam Kripaya Munina Kritam. Out of compassion, the great sage thought it wise that this would enable men to achieve the ultimate goal of life. Thus, he compiled the great narration called the Mahabharata for women, laborers, and friends of the twice born. So it is simply out of Kripaya, out of his great mercy, that he made this arrangement. Dvijabandhuna, of the friends of the twice born, and friends of the twice born. The Dvijabandhus, friends of the twice born, are those who are the lowest amongst the Brahmana, Kshatriya, and Vaishya communities. In other words, they are born in these families, but they themselves are not equal to their forefathers. Such descendants are not recognized as such for want of purificatory achievements. In other words, they did not undergo the rites of purification successfully. The rites of purification begin with Garbhadhana Samskar. Then there are several other samskaras or purificatory rites. After this particular samskara, one is rightly called twice born. The samskara called Upanayana or spiritual initiation. One birth is calculated during the seed giving samskara, and the second birth is calculated at the time of spiritual initiation. One who has been able to undergo such important samskaras can be called a bona fide twice born. If the father and mother do not undertake the process of spiritual family planning and simply beget children out of passion only, their children are called Bijabandhus. So when the husband and wife are restricted and they only engage in sexual activity in union for the sake of having children who would be noble souls, then there's a good chance that the children would be of a much higher quality. Otherwise, you get these Bijavandus if born out of descendants of the twice born. These Bijavandus are certainly not as intelligent as children of the regular twice born families. The Bijavandus are classified with the Shudras and the woman class, who are by nature less intelligent. The Shudras and the woman class do not have to undergo any samskara, seven except the ceremony of marriage. So, Vyasadeva considered, but they also need to understand the purport of the scriptures, because everybody is supposed to come up. Everybody is supposed to upgrade. It's all right, for various reasons, people are born in families that they are according to their previous karma. But nevertheless, everyone should be given the chance to come up. So, considering this, for them, the Mahabharata was prepared. The purpose of the Mahabharata is to administer the purpose of the Vedas, and therefore within this Mahabharata, the summary Veda of Bhagavad Gita is placed. The less intelligent are more interested in stories than in philosophy, and therefore the philosophy of the Vedas in the form of the Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Lord Sri Krishna. So by presenting Bhagavad Gita within the Mahabharata, Vyasadeva gave people a chance to come, to upgrade themselves. The Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all Vedic knowledge. It is the first book of spiritual values, as the Upanishads are. Within the Mahabharata is the first book of spiritual values, just as the Upanishads are the first books of spiritual values within the Shruti. The Vedanta philosophy is the subject matter for study by the spiritual graduates. Only the postgraduate spiritual student can enter into the spiritual or devotion service of the Lord. It is the great science, and the great professor is the Lord himself in the form of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And persons who are empowered by him can initiate others in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So just as there were professors for the different Vedic scriptures, the professor for Srimad Bhagavatam is Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Evam pravrittisya sada bhutanam shreyasid puja sarvatmakenapi yada natushya hridayam tataha. Right. Or twice born Brahmana, still his mind was not satisfied, although he engaged himself in working for the total welfare of all people. So he was engaged in working for the welfare of all creatures. He presented karma for them. He had prepared literatures of Vedic value for the all-around welfare of the general mass of people. So one will expect that he should be satisfied, but he was not. Nati prasidat hridaya saraswatyas tateshchal vitarkayan viviktastha idam chovacha dharmavrit. Thus the sage, being dissatisfied at heart, at once began to reflect, because he knew the essence of religion, and he said within himself. So he was not very satisfied. And he was thinking about the reason for his dissatisfaction. So he told himself the following. The sage began to search out the cause of not being satisfied at heart. Perfection is never attained until one is satisfied at heart. This satisfaction of heart has to be searched out beyond matter. धृतव्रतेन हि मया छन्दांसि गुरुवोग्नयः मानिता निर्यलीकेन गृहीतं चानुशासनम् भारतव्यपदेशेन ह्याम्नायार्थश्च प्रदर्शितः दृश्यते यत्र धर्मादि स्त्रीशूद्रादिभिरप्युत. Under strict disciplinary vow, the Vedic hymns, the spiritual masters, the sacrificial choir have been properly worshipped by me without pretense. The traditional discipline has also been accepted by me. on the pretext of compiling the Mahabharata, the import of disciplic succession has been properly explained by me. By seeing that the path of religion and so on can be discovered by women, Shudras, and others, even by them. I have, under strict disciplinary vows, unpretentiously worshipped the Vedas, the spiritual masters, and the altar of sacrifice. I have also abided by the rulings, and have shown the import of disciplic succession through the explanation of the Mahabharata, by which even women, Shudras, and others, friends of the twice born, can see the path of religion. The religion includes dharma, religion, economic development, sense enjoyment, liberation. Nirvyalikeena, nishkapata buddhya, manita pujita. Without any pretension, without any dishonesty. Why does he say this? Because the Vedic teachings have to be revealed in the heart. When the Supreme Being is satisfied with us, then he reveals the purport of Vedic knowledge. That is knowledge, that is understanding, and that is realization. In order to get understanding and realization, one needs to be helped by superiors. And therefore, simply sitting and studying the Vedas in some university by learning Sanskrit, you'll not get it. There are many things that must be done. No one can understand the import of the Vedas without having undergone a strict disciplinary vow and disciplic succession. The Vedas, spiritual masters, and sacrificial fire must be worshipped by the desiring candidate. So he did all of these things, and still he didn't understand why he was dissatisfied. So all of this information, of course, has been presented by him again in the Mahabharata, so that this woman class, the laborer class, and the unqualified members of Brahmana, Kshatriya, or Vaishya families can also understand. So therefore, for members of Kali Yuga, members of the human community in Kali Yuga, the Mahabharata is more important, more essential than the original Vedas, the four Vedas. तथापि मतमे दैह्यो ह्यात्मा चैव आत्मना विभुः असंपन्न इव भाति ब्रह्मवर्चस्य सत्तमः. I'm feeling incomplete, though I myself am fully equipped with everything required by the Vedas. So Vyasadeva, he felt incomplete, even though he had done so many things. It seemed that he was spiritually, he did not have any spiritual accomplishments. It seemed that even though he was the best amongst those who were shining with the Vedic knowledge, Vedic exegesis, and so on, still he appeared to be unsuccessful. This is how he thought to himself. Undoubtedly, Srila Vyasadeva was complete in all the details of Vedic achievements. Purification of the living being submerged in matter is made possible by the prescribed activities in the Vedas, but the ultimate achievement is different. Unless it is attained, the living being, even though fully equipped, cannot be situated in the transcendently normal stage. Srila Vyasadeva appeared to have lost the clue and therefore felt dissatisfaction. So he was thinking that my soul situated in the body is, it appears to be wanting in sufficiency by myself, even though I am the supreme of the Vedantists. So he, it appears that and that by Krishna's arrangement, as Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur will explain, that he didn't understand that the living being should be placed in this position of prema bhakti, which is only means and goal, the ultimate means and goal, as presented in the Veda itself. Kimva Bhagavata Dharma na prayena nirupita priya paramahamsana ta eva hyachyuta priya. This may be because I did not specifically point out the devotion service of the Lord, which is dear both to perfect beings and to the infallible Lord. Now, he himself anticipates the reason for his dissatisfaction. This may be, I may be dissatisfied because I have not primarily delineated Bhagavata Dharma, Bhuyastvena, because those activities of Bhagavata Dharma are what are dear to Lord Achyuta. The dissatisfaction which was being felt by Srila Vyasadeva is expressed herein in his own words. This was felt for the normal condition of the living being in the devotional service of the Lord. Unless one is fixed in the normal condition of service, neither the Lord nor the living being can become fully satisfied. This defect was felt by him when Narada Muni, his spiritual master, reached him. It is described as follows. So he sensed that it must be because he did not explain Bhagavata Dharma, Bhakti Dharma, primarily and clearly. As we learn from Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, Vedic Dharma has different levels. Karma Dharma, Jnana Dharma, Yoga Dharma, Bhakti Dharma. Bhakti Dharma is the highest rung of Vedic knowledge. Tasyaivam khilamatmanam manyamanasya khidyatah Krishnasya narado dhyagat ashramam pragudahritam. As mentioned before, Narada reached the cottage of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa on the banks of the Saraswati, just as Vyasadeva was regretting his defects. So Narada Muni reached the cottage of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa on the banks of the Saraswati, which was mentioned before. And he did so while Vyasadeva was regretting his defects. He was wondering, what is it that I have missed? Pragudahritam Saraswati Tirastham. Yes. The vacuum felt by Vyasadeva was not due to his lack of knowledge. This will be explained more clearly in the next chapter. Bhagavata Dharma is purely devotional service of the Lord to which the monist has no access. The monist is not counted among the Paramahamsas, the most perfect of the renounced order of life. Srimad Bhagavatam is full of narrations of the transcendental activities of the personality of Godhead. Although Vyasadeva was an empowered divinity, he still felt dissatisfaction because in none of his works were the transcendental activities of the Lord properly explained. This point that Bhagavata Dharma is that which is rendered by the Paramahamsas, and that the Paramahamsas don't refer to the Jnanis or Yogis, rather it refers to the Bhakta Paramahamsas. When one becomes a Nirapeksha Vaishnava, when he exclusively engages in the activities of bhakti, and he has no time for yoga, he has no time for jnana, he has no time for karma also, no family life, and he obviously has no time or taste for sinful activities or dharma, then he is a Bhakta Paramahamsa. And when he says that Bhagavata Dharma, which is pleasing to the Paramahamsas. He's talking of Bhagavata Dharma, which is pleasing to the Bhakta Paramahamsas, not to the Jnani Paramahamsas, not to the Yogi Paramahamsas, not these people who may also engage in Bhagavata Dharma in order to get Brahman realization or Paramatma realization. This is a point from Srila Jiva Goswami's Krama Sandarbha. Then the next point is from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. The inspiration was infused by Sri Krishna directly in the heart of Vyasadeva, and thus he felt the vacuum as explained above. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti points out that even though Vyasadeva is an incarnation of the Supreme Lord, we know from Chaitanya Charitamrita that Vyasa is Shakti-Avesha incarnation. As a general principle, Vyasa is a Shakti-Avesha incarnation. So he is an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur identifies him as such. And then he asks the question, then how can the Lord's own incarnation be dissatisfied? Then he says this is similar to how Baladev was in a state of astonishment and apparent ignorance just to beautify Krishna's pastimes. When Brahma had stolen the cowherd boys and the cows, and Krishna had become many of these calves and the boys. Brahma had stolen the calves and the cowherd boys. So at that time, Lord Baladev, he was very surprised. Who are these? Why are they being so different from the regular calves and cowherd boys? Maybe these are different forms of my master Krishna. This will come in the 10th canto. We will see this. So that was done by Krishna himself for a particular purpose. Similarly, here, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti explains, this was done by Krishna himself for a particular purpose. And the purpose was to manifest Srimad Bhagavatam. The inspiration was infused by Sri Krishna directly in the heart of Vyasadeva, and thus he felt the vacuum as explained above. It is definitely expressed herewith that without the transcendental loving service of the Lord, everything is void. But in the transcendental service of the Lord, everything is tangible without any separate attempt at fruitive work or empiric philosophical speculation. Tam abhigyaya sahasa pratyuthayagatam munihi pujayamasa vidvan naradam surapujitam. At the auspicious arrival of Sri Narada, Sri Vyasadeva got up respectfully and worshipped him, giving him veneration equal to that given to Brahmaji, the creator. It is understood from the expression Surapujitam. Narada was worshipped by the demigods. So from this expression, it is understood that he had come from Brahmaloka. Narada had come from Brahmaloka. Vidhivat. He worshipped him according to the rules and regulations, and he worshipped him the way one worships Vidhi. Vidhi is a name of Brahma. Vidhi means Brahma, the first created living being. He is the original student as well as professor of the Vedas. He learned it from Sri Krishna and taught Narada first. So Narada is the second Acharya in the line of spiritual disciplic succession. He is the representative of Brahma, and therefore he is respected exactly like Brahma, the father of all Vidhis regulations. Similarly, all other successive disciples in the chain are also equally respected as representatives of the original spiritual master. In the 5th chapter, Narada instructs about the supremacy of Hari Kirtana. he describes that Hari Kirtana is superior to all other forms of Vedic Dharma. He does this in order to satisfy Vyasadev's mind, which had been dissatisfied. Narada's instructions on Srimad Bhagavatam for Vyasadeva. Suto Vacha. Athattam Sukhamasina Upasina Bhrachavaha. Devarshir Prahaviprashim Veenapani Smayan. Suta Goswami said, thus the sage amongst the gods, Narada, comfortably seated and apparently smiling, addressed the Rishi amongst the Brahmanas, Vedavyas. So here, Brahashrava indicates that Narada Muni was greatly famous and respected, and he was slightly smiling. Iva indicates as if he was smiling. Iva. Where is it? Smayan Iva. Apparently. That apparently means, oh, now I have to instruct somebody who should actually not be instructed. Even such a great soul as you are bewildered. Thinking like this, he was smiling. Narada was smiling because he well knew the great sage Vyasadeva and the cause of his disappointment. As he will explain gradually, Vyasadev's disappointment was due to insufficiency in presenting the signs of devotional service. Narada knew the defect, and it was confirmed by the position of Vyasa. Narada Vacha, Parasharya Mahabhag, Bhavatah Kachidatmana, Paritushyati Sharira Atma Manasa Evava. Addressing Vyasadeva, the son of Parashara, Narada inquired, are you satisfied by identifying with the body or the mind as objects of self-realization? Or will the soul that identifies with its body be satisfied with its body? Will the soul that identifies with its mind be satisfied with its mind? So this is a hint. This is a hint. He should have brought up the point that Vyasadeva should have discussed pure spiritual life after self-realization, which is nothing but Bhagavata Dharma. This was a hint by Narada to Vyasadeva regarding the cause of his despondency. Vyasadeva, as a descendant of Parashara, a greatly powerful sage, had the privilege of having a great parentage, which should not have given Vyasadeva cause for despondency. Being a great son of a great father, he should not have identified the self with the body or the mind. One cannot be cheerful by nature unless one is factually seated in self-realization, which is transcendental to the material body and mind. Jigyasitam susampannam apite mahadadbhutam kritavan bharatam yastvam sarvartha paribramhitam. Your inquiries were full and your studies were also well fulfilled. And there is no doubt that you have prepared a great and wonderful work, the Mahabharata, which is full of all kinds of Vedic sequences elaborately explained. Vedic sequence means sequences of Vedic texts. Your inquiries refer to his inquiries about Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So he had completed his research, studied also very well, and the word api also means also, which indicates that it has a sense of etc., which comes out to mean that your studies were good. First of all, your desire to learn was good, then your studies were good, and then your application was also good. In some manuscripts, instead of api, ai comes, in which case it should be understood to be O Vyasadeva, it's an address. How do we know that Vyasadev's inquiry, study, and application were well accomplished? That is because he had prepared a great and wonderful work, the Mahabharata. Sarvairarthai dharmadibhi paribramhitam paripurnam, because it is filled with dharma, artha, kama, moksha, descriptions of how to attain these. The despondency of Vyasadeva was certainly not due to his lack of sufficient knowledge, because as a student he had fully inquired about the Vedic literatures, as a result of which the Mahabharata is compiled with full explanation of the Vedas. Brahma. जिज्ञासितमधीतं च ब्रह्मयत्तत् सनातनं तथापि शोच्यस्य आत्मानम् अकृतार्थ इव प्रभो. You have fully delineated the subject of impersonal Brahman as well as the knowledge derived therefrom. Why should you be despondent in spite of all this, thinking that you are undone, my dear Prabhu? Vyasadeva had also inquired about and analyzed, studied, and realized the eternal supreme Brahman. So then, why should he lament? On the basis of Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, Prabhupada writes, the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra compiled by Sri Vyasadeva is the full deliberation of the impersonal absolute feature and is accepted as the most exalted philosophical exposition in the world. It covers the subject of eternity and the methods are scholarly. The Vedanta Sutras talking about the absolute impersonal feature simply means that it talks about the Supreme Brahman as being non-material. It does not talk about, explicitly talk about the Supreme Absolute Truths, spiritual variety. This is already noted in the introduction, Prabhupada's introduction, where he paraphrases Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings on the Vedanta Sutra. Vyasauvacha अस्त्येव मे सर्वमिदं त्वयोक्तं तथापि नात्मा परितुष्यते मे तन्मूलम् अव्यक्तम् अगाधं बोधं पृच्छामहे त्वात्मभवात्मभूतम्. Vyasadeva said, all you have said about me is perfectly correct. Despite all this, I am not pacified. I therefore question you about the root cause of my dissatisfaction. For you are a man of unlimited knowledge due to your being the offspring of one Brahma, who is self-born without mundane father and mother. Neither my body, neither myself, my body, my mind, nothing is in a state of pacification. So therefore, I am asking you for the root cause of that dissatisfaction, because it is unclear to me. O Narada Muni, we ask you. It's a respectful way of speaking. I ask you. I ask you because you are born from Brahma's body. Therefore, you have a very deep understanding. In the material world, everyone is engrossed with the idea of identifying the body or the mind with the self. As such, all knowledge disseminated in the material world is related either with the body or with the mind, and that is the root cause of all despondencies. This is not always detected, even though one may be the greatest erudite scholar in materialistic knowledge. It is good, therefore, to approach a personality like Narada to solve the root cause of all despondencies. Why Narada should be approached is explained below. What happened to yes. Savai bhavan veda samasta guhyam upasito yat purushah purana paravaresho manasaiva vishwam sajityavatyatik gunaira sangaha. My Lord, everything that is mysterious is known to you because you worship the creator and destroyer of the material world and the maintainer of the spiritual world, the original personality of Godhead, who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature. So you know uh, everything that is confidential because you worship the oldest personality of Godhead, the controller of the material and spiritual worlds, who creates, maintains, and annihilates the universe simply with his mind while being unattached to the qualities of matter. Agada bodhata prapanchayannaha. So now he elaborates, he demonstrates that Narada Muni has unlimited knowledge in two verses, text 6 and 7. A person who is 10% engaged in the service of the Lord is the emblem of all knowledge. Such a devotee of the Lord in full perfection of devotional service is also perfect by the qualification of the personality of Godhead. In other words, when one becomes fully perfect in devotional service, then uh, he has the qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, to some degree, not to all degrees. As such, the Eightfold Perfections of mystic power, Ashtasiddhi, constitute very little of his godly opulence. A devotee like Narada can act wonderfully by his spiritual perfection, which every individual is trying to attain. Srila Narada is a 10% perfect living being, although not equal to the personality of Godhead. So, just by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead fully, purely, absolutely, in perfection, one can know everything that one needs to know. त्वं पर्यटन्नर्क इव त्रिलोकीमन्तश्चरो वायुरिवात्मसाक्षी परावरे ब्रह्मणि धर्मतो वृत्तैः स्नातस्य मे न्यूनमलं विचक्ष्व. Like the sun, your goodness can travel everywhere in the three worlds. And like the air, you can penetrate the internal region of everyone. As such, you are as good as your all-pervasive super soul. Please therefore find out the deficiency in me, despite my being absorbed in transcendence under disciplinary regulations and laws. First of all, it should be noted that in the Vedic system, one approaches a guru just so that he can find out what is wrong with his endeavors. Otherwise, there's no need to go to a guru. It is to because one is unable to understand what is wrong with his endeavors. Therefore, he needs someone who is superior to him, who can point that out. That is what Vyasadeva is doing right now. Tvam trilokim paryatan narka iva sarvadarshi, like the sun which moves across the three worlds, you can see everything. Yoga balena vaya, mystic power. Pranavayu riva sarva praninam antaschara, sun. And you also move within all the creatures like the pranavayu. It's one of the five life airs. Atmasakshi buddhi vitigya. So in this way, you are a witness of all the souls. In other words, you are aware of their varied conceptions. Ataha pare brahmani dharmataha yogena nishnatasya. So, since I am immersed through yoga in dharma, in the Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and since I am immersed in the inferior Brahman is the Veda, Vedic knowledge, through various vows and through various regulations of study. Uh, please consider and please analyze the defect in me. Now, Yagyavalkya has noted that uh, worship, good behavior, sense control, non-violence, charity, Vedic study, performance of one's duties, amongst all of these, the supreme dharma is that uh, by which one can attain self-realization. And that process by which one attains self-realization is what is called yoga, spiritual activity. Transcendental realization, pious activities, worshipping the deities, charity, mercifulness, non-violence, and studying the scriptures under strict disciplinary regulations are always helpful. So that's coming from Yagyavalkya Smriti. Shri Nardo Vacha, Bhavatanudita Prayam, Yasho Bhagavato Malam, Yenaiva Sau na Tushyeta, Manyeta Darshanam Shilam. Narada said, "You have not actually broadcast the sublime and spotless glories of the personality of Godhead. That philosophy which does not satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord is considered worthless." Anudita Prayam, Anukta Prayam. Factually or practically speaking, you have not described the sublime glory of the personality of Godhead. And without that, with knowledge of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan, will not be satisfied. And if he is not satisfied, then you cannot be satisfied. So therefore, your understanding is defective. The eternal relation of an individual soul with the Supreme Soul Personality of Godhead is constitutionally one of being the eternal servitor of the eternal Master. The Lord has expanded himself as living beings in order to accept loving service from them, and this alone can satisfy both the Lord and the living beings. Such a scholar as Vyasadeva has completed many expansions of the Vedic literatures, ending with the Vedanta philosophy, but none of them have been written directly glorifying the personality of Godhead. Dry philosophical speculations on the transcendental subject of the Absolute have very little attraction to the Supreme Being or the Paramahamsas without directly dealing with the glorification of the Lord. The personality of Godhead is the last word in transcendental realization. The Absolute, realized as impersonal Brahman or localized Supersoul Paramatma, is less productive of transcendental bliss than the supreme personal realization of his glories. That's from Srila Jiva Goswami. Here. So even though you might have discussed a supreme absolute truth, you did not specifically point out the unique features of Bhagavan, the complete manifestation of the absolute truth. And the next paragraph is straight from Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur. The compiler of the Vedanta Darshana is Vyasadeva himself. Yet he is troubled, although he is the author. So what sort of transcendental bliss can be derived by the readers and listeners of Vedanta, which is not explained directly by Vyasadeva, the author? Herein arises the necessity of explaining Vedanta Sutra in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam by the self-same author. यथा धर्मादयश्चार्था मुनिवर्यानुकीर्तिताः न तथा वासुदेवस्य महिमा ह्यनुवर्णितः. Although great sage, you have very broadly described the four principles beginning with religious performances. You have not described the glories of the Supreme Personality, Vasudeva. Objection. The glorious position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead have been repeatedly described here and there by me. Anticipating this, he speaks this verse that you have described dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Cha also has a sense of etc. In this context, it refers to the means by which one can attain dharma, artha, kama, moksha. The means by which one can attain pious credits, one can attain economic development, one can attain wealth, one can attain satisfactory sense enjoyment, one can attain liberation from the miseries of material existence. So even though you've described dharma, artha, kama, moksha along with the means by which one can attain that, you have not described the glories of Lord Vasudeva to the same extent. You have not primarily described his glories. Rather, you have primarily described the glories of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha and the means to attain Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. The prompt diagnosis of Sri Narada is at once declared. The root cause of the despondency of Vyasadeva was his deliberate avoidance of glorifying the Lord in his various editions of the Puranas. He has certainly, as a matter of course, given descriptions of the glories of the Lord Sri Krishna, but not as many as given to religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and salvation. These four items are by far inferior to engagement in the devotional service of the Lord. Sri Vyasadeva, as the authorized scholar, knew very well this difference, and still, instead of giving more importance to the better type of engagement, namely devotional service to the Lord, he had more or less improperly used his valuable time, and thus he was despondent. This is, of course, Narada Muni's point to Vyasadeva in order to address the reason for his despondency. Vyasadeva simply amplified the teachings of the four Vedas through his contribution in the form of the Puranas. As we will learn in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the Vedas, they talk about all these things in order to give a taste for becoming submissive to the Vedas. Rochanartha Phalashrutihi. In order to, first of all, gain the confidence of the conditioned soul. So Vyasadeva had followed that same Vaidiki Riti, that style of the Vedas. But nevertheless, he was still despondent. To such an extent that Narada Muni considered that he had wasted his valuable time. From this, it is clearly indicated that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. Why does Narada Muni indicate that Vyasadeva has improperly used his valuable time? Because Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha cannot satisfy the souls. And even though the souls want it, and even though we may be duty bound to attract them by giving these descriptions, still it is not going to yield any permanent benefit for them. And therefore, from the perspective of Narada Muni and from the perspective of Vyasadeva, actually none of these things are actually required. What all of us are meant to do is nothing but pure sadhana bhakti in order to attain pure bhava bhakti and then pure prema bhakti. That's it. Nothing else is required. But the conditioned souls don't want it. So when you get into this bridge preaching of this nature, then at some point, if you are genuine, then you will also become despondent, because there's a limit to it. There's a limit to it. After liberation, which is the last last item in the line of performing religiosity, etc., one is engaged in pure devotional service. This is called the stage of self-realization, or the Brahmabhuta stage. After attainment of this Brahmabhuta stage, one is satisfied. But satisfaction is the beginning of transcendental bliss. One should progress by attaining neutrality and equality in the relative world. And passing the stage of equanimity, one is fixed in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. This is the instruction of the personality of Godhead in the Bhagavad Gita. The conclusion is that in order to maintain the status quo of the Brahmabhuta stage, as also to increase the degree of transcendental realization, Narada recommended to Vyasadeva that he, Vyasadeva, should now eagerly and repeatedly describe the path of devotional service. This would cure him from gross despondency. There's a reason why Prabhupada is bringing up this. This is from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. And Vishwanath Chakravarti points out that Vyasadeva thought that it is not that I have not described about pure devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which reveals the factual glories of Lord Vasudeva. For instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, Brahmabhuta Prasannatma Nashochati Nakamshiti Samasarveshu Bhuteshu Mad Bhaktim Labate Param establishes very clearly that bhakti is superior to liberation, pure bhakti. But Narada Muni's point is, you have not primarily brought out these points. You have mentioned them here and there. You have described Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Occasionally, you have described the importance of bhakti, pure sadhana bhakti, pure bhava bhakti, pure vaibhava bhakti, but not to the same extent. Therefore, you are dissatisfied. The indication is, now you must write something which will satisfy you. Na yad vachaschitra padam harer yasho jagat pavitram pragranita karhecha tad vayasam tirtham shanti manasana hamsa niravantu shikshaya. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Since all perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. Vasudeva Vyatirikta Anyam Vishayam Jnanavat Eva Anya Vishayam Vakchaturyam Cha Vakchaturyam Cha Khilameva Tyaha Neti. One might be very expert in presentation, but just as knowledge of anything that is distinct from Vasudeva is defective, similarly, such expertise in presentation on subjects which are distinct from Vasudeva are also inferior. This has been further explained by Prabhupada, so I'll just read and explain from the purport. Crows and swans are not birds of the same feather because of their different mental attitudes. The fruity workers or passionate men are compared to the crows, whereas the all-perfect saintly persons are compared to the swans. The crows take pleasure in a place where garbage is thrown out, just as the passionate fruity workers take pleasure in wine and women and places for gross sense pleasure. The swans do not take pleasure in the places where crows are assembled for conferences and meetings. They are instead seen in the atmosphere of natural scenic beauty, where there are transparent reservoirs of water, nicely decorated with stems of lotus flowers in variegated colors of natural beauty. That is the difference between the two classes of birds. Nature has influenced different species of life with different mentalities, and it is not possible to bring them up into the same rank and file. Similarly, there are different kinds of literature for different types of men of different mentality. Mostly, the market literatures which attract men of the crows categories are literatures containing refuse remnants of sensuous topics. They're generally known as mundane talks in relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They're full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes and metaphorical arrangements. Yet, with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Such poetry and prose on any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. Spiritually advanced men who are compared to the swans do not take pleasure in such dead literatures, which are sources of pleasure for men who are spiritually dead. These literatures, in the modes of passion and ignorance, are distributed under different labels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus the swan-like spiritual advancement have nothing to do with them. Such spiritual advancement are called manasa, also because they always keep up the standard of transcendental voluntary service to the Lord on the spiritual plane. This completely forbids fruitive activities for gross bodily satisfaction, bodily sense satisfaction, or subtle speculation of the material egoistic mind. Social literary men, scientists, mundane poets, theoretical philosophers, and politicians who are completely absorbed in the material advancement of sense pleasure are all dolls of the material energy. They take pleasure in a place where rejected subject matters are thrown. According to Swami Sridhara, this is the pleasure of the prostitute hunters. But literatures which describe the glories of the Lord are enjoyed by the Paramhamsas who have grasped the essence of human activities. So there are different types of literature. Anything which does not present the glories of Lord Hari, it is meant for those who are as good as crows. So those who are as good as swans, they will certainly not like it. So Narada Muni has sensed what Vyasadeva was considering in his mind. Maybe I didn't describe Bhagavata Dharma that is pleasing to Lord Achyuta and to the Paramahamsas. The Paramahamsas are compared to swans. So it is natural, yes, because they will not find any satisfaction in anything which is apart from a pure description of Lord Vasudeva. Tadvag sarvo janataka viplavo yasmin pratishlokam abadhavatyapi namanyanantasya yashogitani yashranvanti gayanti grananti sadhavaha. On the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, forms, pastimes, etc. of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation, full of transcendental words directed toward bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Vinapi padachaturyam Bhagavatyashah pradhanam vachah pavitram. But even without expertise in poetic or literary presentation, words which primarily present the glorious position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are pure. With this in mind, he speaks the next verse. They destroy the sins of the general mass, even when they are found to contain improper words in every stanza, because they contain the holy names of Lord Ananta, the unlimited Supreme Lord, which have been woven, the holy names of Lord Ananta are imprinted in his glory. And these books contain a description of his glory. So, because the sages, the sadhus, the great souls, they are very attracted to these holy names. When they are, there is a proper speaker, they hear these holy names from them. When there is a proper audience, then they recite these names. When there is no proper speaker, no proper audience, then they themselves they sing these holy names for themselves. So from this we understand that the description of the Supreme Personality of God's pure glory are imprinted with his holy names, Namankita. And that Prabhupada said that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would say that does it have, does your article have Krishna, Krishna, Krishna? Does it have Krishna's holy name? If it is, then he liked. So, if you simply describe Krishna's glories purely, even though it is not properly presented, if it has Krishna's holy name, then Narada Muni says that this is good. This is good. One important point to note is from Srimad Bhagavatam, we also learn how to propagate the Srimad Bhagavatam. Everything is very explicit in Srimad Bhagavatam about Krishna. Bhagavatam does not hide Krishna's glories in order to attract people and then later on expose to them about Krishna's glories. Right from the beginning, it exposes Krishna's glories. Similarly, if you see Prabhupada, he named his society International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Krishna, explicit, directly. For Bhaktivedanta Institute, he made one logo. Even though the Bhaktivedanta Institute is to attract the attention of scientists and scholars, he made a logo in which there is Lord Vishnu. I don't say a logo, I mean for logo for a magazine. There was a magazine he wanted called Savigyanam. And for that he suggested, he said that there must be a logo. And so it's very explicit. The basic idea is we are what we are. If you are willing to hear, you come and hear. That's all. Not that in order to attract them, we can disguise ourselves as being non-worshippers of Krishna and so on. Here, a saint is always absorbed in glorifying the Supreme Lord because by broadcasting the holy name and fame of the Supreme Lord, the polluted atmosphere of the world will change. And as a result of propagating the transcendental liturgies like Srimad Bhagavatam, people will become sane in their transactions. While preparing this commentation on this particular stanza of Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a crisis before us. Our neighboring friend China has attacked the border of India with a militaristic spirit. We have practically no business in the political field, yet we see that previously there were both China and India, and they both lived peacefully for centuries without ill feeling. The reason is that they lived those days in an atmosphere of God consciousness, and every country over the surface of the world was God fearing, pure hearted, and simple. And there was no question of political diplomacy. There is no cause of quarrel between the two countries, China and India, over land which is not very suitable for habitation. And certainly there is no cause for fighting on this issue. But due to the age of quarrel, Kali, which we have discussed, there is always a chance of quarrel on slight provocation. This is due not to the issue in question, but to the polluted atmosphere of this age. Systematically, there is propaganda by a section of people to stop glorification of the name and fame of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, there is a great need for disseminating the message of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. Primarily, this is actually the duty of India to do this. Bharata Bhumite. Manushya Janma Hoila Jar, Janma Sarthaka Kori Koro Paro Upakar. India is meant to be the guru of the world, but because India has neglected her duty, there is so much quarrel and trouble all over the world. So therefore, Prabhupada strongly asserts that if Srimad Bhagavatam is received by the people, there will be a change of heart. The mass of people in general are tools in the hands of the modern politicians and leaders of the people. If there's a change of heart of the leaders only, certainly there will be a radical change in the atmosphere of the world. And then Prabhupada presents his own explanation of Srimad Bhagavatam as an instance of this very teaching of Narada Muni. Or presenting this matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail. And there will be so many literary discrepancies despite our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with all our faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of society will still accept this due to its being an honest attempt to glorify the Almighty God. When there is fire in a house, the inmates of the house go out to get help from the neighbors who may be foreigners, and yet, without knowing the language, the victims of the fire express themselves, and the neighbors understand the need even though not expressed in the same language. The same spirit of cooperation is needed to broadcast this transcendental message of the Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the polluted atmosphere of the world. After all, it's a technical science of spiritual values, and thus we are concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there will be success. So, Prabhupada wanted that we present Srimad Bhagavatam in order to purify people from the contamination that they have been exposed to by reading unnecessary literature. Under the circumstances, transcendental literature like Srimad Bhagavatam will not only diminish the activities of the corrupt mind of the people in general, but also it will supply food for their hankering after reading some interesting literature. In the beginning, they may not like it because one suffering from jaundice is reluctant to take sugar candy. But we should know that sugar candy is the only remedy for jaundice. This example is straight from Upadeshamrita of Srila Rupa Goswami. Similarly, let there be systematic propaganda for popularizing reading of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which will act like sugar candy for the jaundice-like condition of sense gratification. When men have a taste for this literature, the other literatures which are catering poison to society will then automatically cease. There's one more point I want to bring up. There's a lot of talk nowadays that people have various modes of entertaining themselves. Previously, they would read books, but now they have audio and visual means of entertaining themselves, and therefore, why should we take book reading and so on too seriously in today's distracted world? The answer to this is coming from non-devotee thinkers themselves. There is one James Clear who has pointed out that the greatest impact one can have in somebody else's mind is when you write a book filled with various arguments and he reads it in his privacy at his own time when he wants. He's basically allowing you to enter into his brain and convince him. It is not like a phone call that you make, you can just cut it off. You're a part of your thinking process is now present in the form of a book. There are others also who point out that reading of books have very deep impact in one's thought process. There is textual content, there is audio content, audio plus textual content. Then there is visual plus audio plus textual text content. The third variety may be most appealing, but it is least impactful. The second variety is in between. And the first variety, which is just textual content, that has the greatest impact, even though it reaches out to comparatively a fewer number of people. So therefore, Narada Muni's statement to Vyasadeva, as well as Prabhupada's remarks, are very much relevant even today. We are sure, therefore, that everyone in human society will welcome Srimad Bhagavatam, even though it is now presented with so many faults, for it is recommended by Sri Narada, who has very kindly appeared in this chapter. When Prabhupada was pointed out, like Harishauri Prabhu pointed out, I think it was 8th Canto, there was some factual error in one of his purports. Factual error means some error of fact. Then Prabhupada immediately said, inform the BBT and change it. Similarly, there is a record that Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, Prabhupada had instructed him to analyze the 5th canto in order to work out a proper explanation of Vedic cosmography for the planetarium in the future. He also pointed out that certain things need to be corrected. Prabhupada immediately said, corrected. So these are not relevant faults. These are irrelevant faults. Then what is a relevant fault? A relevant fault is a fault in the description of how one can progress towards the highest perfection of devotional service. Advaitam Harinadvaitat Acharyam Bhakti Samshanat. We accept a person as an Acharya, as an authority, because he is describing the science of pure bhakti. Therefore, Advaita Acharya is accepted as an Acharya because he taught pure bhakti. That is why. In fact, Shiksha Guru itself means Haribhakti Shiksha Guru. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur has pointed this out. So there cannot be mistakes in the description of how one can attain prema bhakti. That is a relevant fault. You'll never find anything of that sort in any of Prabhupada's explanations or any of the explanations of the liberated souls. Still, just as when Ganga comes into this world and comes in the human society, you will find some bubbles and foam. You are meant to ignore this foam and bubble when you go and take bath in Ganga. Similarly, when the liberated Acharya appears within human society, these things will also naturally arise. But those who are seriously interested in the ultimate goal of life will naturally disregard them. These are bubbles in the Ganges. Naishkarmyamapyachyuta bhavavarjitam न शोभते ज्ञानमलं निरञ्जनं कुतः पुनः शश्वतभद्रम् ईश्वरे अचार्पितं कर्म यदप्य कारणम्. Knowledge of self-realization, even though free from all material affinity, does not look well if devoid of a conception of the infallible God. What then is the use of fruitive activities which are naturally painful from the very beginning and transient by nature if they are not utilized for the devotional service of the Lord? Bhaktihinam karma शून्यमेव इति कैमुत्यन्यायेन दर्शयति नैष्कर्म्यम् इति. Even realization through the process of jnana is not good when it does not contain ecstatic devotion unto Lord Achyuta. Then the process of karma, when it is devoid of karma means varnashrama dharma, when it is devoid of Bhagavata dharma, is certainly nothing. It's useless. It's absolutely useless. In fact, even when one engages in the activities of jnana, if he does not mix them with the activities of bhakti, it will not lead to spiritual realization of Brahman. So then what to speak about the activities of karma, specifically kamya karma? There are, I might have mentioned this, but nevertheless, let me explain it once more. There is nitya karma, there is naimittika karma, and there is kamya karma. Activities of the karma system or activities in varnashrama dharma are of three types: daily duties, periodical and circumstantial duties, optional duties. These optional duties are kamya karma. You want a child, you do this. You want a wife, you do that. You want a father, you want a husband, you do this. You want to become rich, you do that. Like that, there are hundreds of things. So called kamya karma. Then, apart from that, you have nitya naimittika karma. So right now, he's pointing out that kamya karma is inauspicious, both in the beginning and at the end, in the sense that it is filled with misery. Material life is filled with misery, so therefore it is filled with misery. And apart from that, even the activities of karma which do not belong to the kamya category, they also, when they are not offered unto the Supreme Lord, again they don't look good, which means they don't yield purification of existence. They do not purify the heart. They don't free us from lust, anger, greed, and so on. When speculation on the impersonal Brahman is condemned on the above ground, then what to speak of ordinary fruitive work, which is not meant to fulfill the aim of devotional service? Such speculative knowledge and fruitive work cannot lead one to the goal of perfection. Fruitive work, in which almost all people in general are engaged, is always painful either in the beginning or at the end. It can be fruitful only when made subservient to the devotional service of the Lord. When one engages in one's material duties, but he mixes it with bhakti in order that bhakti predominates and bhakti takes over fully, that is okay. There you're connecting karma with bhakti. So whenever we talk about Varnashrama Dharma within ISKCON, we are always talking about Varnashrama Dharma within the context of Bhagavata Dharma. Strictly speaking, it is a good facility with which one can execute Bhagavata Dharma, provided you are very careful about the elements that you accept. And you're also careful about the attitude with which you execute Varnashrama Dharma. In the Bhagavad Gita also, it is confirmed that the result of such fruitive work may be offered for the service of the Lord, otherwise it leads to material bondage. The bona fide enjoyer of the fruitive work is the personality of Godhead, and thus when it is engaged for the sense gratification of the living beings, it becomes an acute source of trouble. Atho Mahabhaga Bhavanamukha Drik Shuchishvava Satya Rato Dhrita Vrata Urkramasya Khilabanda Mutta Ye Samadhina Nus Maratad Vicheshtitam. So Vyasadeva, your vision is completely perfect. Your good fame is spotless. You're firm in vow and situated in truthfulness. And thus you can think of the pastimes of the Lord in trance for the liberation of the people in general from all material bondage. So he wants him to think repeatedly about the various pastimes of the Lord and then describe them. He wanted him to think repeatedly in samadhi, trance. So, till now, he has pointed out that because he has pointed out this, the process of knowledge or the culture of knowledge, Vedic knowledge, that is devoid of Bhagavata Dharma, as well as expertise in one's literary presentations, that is devoid of bhakti, or expertise in engagement in Varnashrama Dharma, Stri Dharma, and so on, which is devoid of bhakti. All of these are useless, certainly useless. Therefore, one should therefore Vyasadeva must repeatedly describe the pastimes of Lord Hari, the activities of Lord Hari. Prabhupada points out that there are various types of literatures, mundane poems, philosophical speculations, more or less under Maya's influence. Ultimately, they end in different types of sense enjoyment. But they are very beautifully decorated in various ways in order to make the less intelligent very attentive. In today's world, it is, if you think about it, it is quite astonishing that Most of humanity today is desperately trying to forget reality in various ways. They drink in order to forget reality. They read fiction in order to forget reality. They hear, they see television serials and movies which are primarily containing fictional content. Of course, there is the news and there are documentaries. That's there. But they are not primarily consumed by today's humanity. People seem to be obsessed with fiction of various types, which is just one level worse. At least literature which deals with reality gives you knowledge of reality, which might be useful in some manner. But something which is entirely fiction, it is false. What is the use of trying to relish something which is false? But people are obsessed with that. This is, to me, it gives me the impression that they must be so utterly dejected, so utterly despondent that the only juice they can get in life is something which is absolutely imaginary. The Vedic system is not like that. It gives you the system of karma. If you're obsessed with material enjoyment, you engage in various pious activities, and later in your next life, you can actually experience the material happiness that you're seeking to attain, provided you accept the discipline of karma, which of course is mixed with the process of Bhagavata Dharma. Even if you want to attain just materialistic goals, you need to engage in worship of Lord Vishnu along with so many other things. There are do's and don'ts along with cans and cannots. But the entire process leads you to fulfill your desire. You don't just sit watching some fiction, some fantasy, which correlates with your own private fantasies. So here, Narada Muni's message to Vyasadeva is that he composes a transcendental literature which should be attractive, but at the same time, it should have a practical benefit. Here, Sri Narada Rishi, being the best amongst the Vaishnavas, is compassionate towards such unfortunate victims of worthless literatures, and thus he advises Sri Vyasadeva to compose transcendental literature which is not only attractive but can also actually bring liberation from all kinds of bondage. Srila Vyasadeva or his representatives are qualified because they are rightly trained to see things in true perspective. Srila Vyasadeva and his representatives are pure in thought due to their spiritual enlightenment, fixed in their vows due to their devotion service, and determined to deliver the fallen souls rotting in material activities. The fallen souls are very eager to receive novel informations every day, and the transcendentalists like Vyasadeva or Narada can supply such eager people in general with unlimited news from the spiritual world. Specifically, Prabhupada recommends the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. They are specifically recommended to suffering humanity to bring about the desired effect of liberation from the pangs of material civilization, which is eating the vital part of human energy. Bhagavad Gita is preliminary to Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for all the living beings all over the universe for total liberation from all kinds of material bondage. This is a very magnificent exposition of this one word. Akhila Bandha Muktaye, for liberation from all kinds of bondage, for everyone's liberation from bondage, for everyone's liberation from every type of bondage. Such transcendental narrations of the pastimes of the Lord can be described only by liberated souls like Vyasadeva and his bona fide representatives who are completely immersed in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Yes. No one else can either know or describe the acts of the Lord, even if they speculate on the subject for many, many years. Now, what is the link between Lord Hari's pastimes and Bhagavata Dharma? The link is that unless we engage in the transcendental devotion, the transcendental form of devotion service, which is the perfect, the perfection of pure devotion service, prema bhakti, one cannot perceive the transcendental pastimes of the Lord exactly the way Krishna sees them. So Srimad Bhagavatam describes the pastimes of the Lord, and you may say that the other Puranas also describe the pastimes of the Lord, but there is a very big difference, and we will see that in the very next verse. The Bhagavatam describes Krishna's pastimes in such a manner that corresponds to the perfection of pure devotional service. The vision of the author comprehends past, present, and future. Such liberated persons as Vyasadeva are perfect not only by the power of vision and wisdom, but also in oral reception, in thinking, feeling, and all other sensual activities. Notice this again. Such liberated persons as Vyasadeva are perfect not only by the power of vision and wisdom, but also in oral reception, in thinking, feeling, and all other sense activities. A liberated person possesses perfect senses, and with perfect senses only can one serve the sense proprietor of Rishikesha, Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. In fact, we learn from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu right in the beginning that when one comes to the stage of the perfection of pure devotion service, all forms of mystic opulences automatically follow such a devotee. So one should not be surprised or ridicule the reality that liberated souls actually have perfect sensual perception, even though they may exhibit human defects by their own choice, because that is also a part and parcel of their dealings with humankind. When the Supreme Lord manifests himself like a human being, he deals with human beings in such a manner that they think that he has human defects. We see this in, for instance, the activities of Lord Ramachandra. Even though he is the omniscient Supreme Personality of Godhead, he behaves like a human being many times. So this is technically called Asura Mohana, to bewilder those with a demoniac spirit. The same thing applies to those who have been empowered by the Supreme Lord to spread the perfection of pure devotional service to those who are qualified by letting them associate with human beings. But at the same time, influenced by Yoga Maya, they also behave like human beings. We should understand that one who is on the status of Prema Bhakti, he possesses perfect senses. We also know that you cannot fake it. In fact, when one is in Bhava Bhakti, he exhibits 9 symptoms which invariably correspond to Bhava Bhakti. They cannot be hidden by him also. He can hide various sattvika vikaras, various ecstatic, various symptoms of ecstasy, like tears from his eyes, shaking, and so on. Those things he may suppress, but he cannot suppress the 9 symptoms of Bhava Bhakti. ततोऽन्यथा किंचन यद विवक्षतः पृथक् दृश्यस्तत्कृतरूपनामभिः न कर्हिचित् क्वापि च दुस्थिता मतिर्लभेत भाता हतनौरिवास्पदम्. Whatever you desire to describe that is separate in vision from the Lord simply reacts with different forms, names, and results to agitate the mind as the wind agitates a boat which has no resting place. Vipakshi doshantaram. If one does not present the Supreme Personality of Godhead alone as the only subject matter and purely and properly, there is yet another problem which is being described in this verse. Sri Vyasadeva is the editor of all descriptions of Vedic literatures, and thus he has described transcendental realization in different ways, namely by fruitive activity, speculative knowledge, mystic power, and devotional service, karma, jnana, yoga, bhakti. Besides that, in his various Puranas, he has recommended the worship of so many demigods in different forms and names. The result is that people in general are puzzled how to fix their minds in the service of the Lord. They're always disturbed about finding the real path of self realization. Srila Narada Deva is stressing this particular defect in the Vedic literatures compiled by Vyasadeva, and thus he's trying to emphasize describing everything in relation with the Supreme Lord and no one else. Keep in mind that this is a defect that is required in order to attract the defective souls. That is why Vyasadeva had done that. But because Vyasadeva wanted to know why he was dissatisfied, therefore Narada Muni is describing this. Factually, as Srimad Bhagavatam explains, the Supreme Personality of Godhead possesses everything else as this potency. So therefore, he is the one and only independent, omnipotent entity. So, strictly speaking, Vyasadeva should not have produced any literature other than Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Vyasadeva should not have compiled any Puranas other than the Bhagavata Purana, because a slight deviation from that may create havoc for self-realization. If a slight deviation can create such havoc, then what to speak of deliberate expansion of ideas separate from the absolute truth personality of Godhead? The most defective part of worshipping demigods is that it creates a definite conception of pantheism, ending disastrously in many religious sects, detrimental to the progress of the principles of the Bhagavatam, which alone can give the accurate direction for self-realization in eternal relation with the personality of Godhead by devotional service and transcendental love. Srila Sridhar Swami has referred to Vyavasayatmika buddhi rekeha gurunandanam Bahushakha hyanantasya buddhayo vyavasayena. Narada Muni wants Vyasadeva to become Vyavasayatmika buddhi. The previous books were written for the benefit of those who are not Vyavasayatmika buddhis. But if someone does want to become a Vyavasayatmika buddhi, if he reads those other literature, he'll definitely become highly confused. And because at that particular point in time, there is no Bhagavatam the way we have it now, Narada Muni is stressing this. You have to do something for these people. So therefore, you need to give a book which will make sure that people don't become confused, disturbed. Jugupsitam dharma kritena shasata swabhava raktasya mahanvyatikrama yadvakyato dharma ititara stito namanyate tasya nivaranam jana. The people in general are naturally inclined to enjoy, and you have encouraged them in that way in the name of religion. This is verily condemned and is quite unreasonable. Because they are guided under your instructions, they will accept such activities in the name of religion and will hardly care for prohibitions. Till now, he has stated that in the Mahabharata and other literatures, the glorious position of Lord Hari has not been spotlessly presented, and rather that has been a description of Dharmartha Kama Moksha. But that is insignificant. Now he points out it is going to lead to the very opposite of what you want to achieve. Jugupsitam. Verily, it should be condemned. What you have done is verily to be condemned. Now he is chastising. Why is he chastising? Because the Vedas have a purpose. The Vedas are meant for going back to Godhead, back home. Meaning the Vedas are having as their goal sending the conditioned souls back to Godhead, back home. And human life is a chance for that. So human beings' only duty is to restore his, re-establish his lost relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Under the circumstances, one should never be encouraged in making a plan for sense enjoyment in the name of religious functions. Such diversion of the human energy results in a misguided civilization. Srila Vyasadeva is the authority in Vedic explanations in the Mahabharata, etc. And his encouragement in sense enjoyment in some form or other is a great barrier for spiritual advancement, because the people in general will not agree to renounce material activities which hold them in material bondage. In fact, this has actually taken place. Around Buddha's time, there were these people obsessed with animal sacrifices. Actually, they were obsessed with animal flesh, which they could eat under the pretext of an animal sacrifice. And Lord Buddha had to protest against Vedic authority in order to stop these animals from being killed. Even now, flesh eating goes on under the name of worship of Durga and so on. But actually, the entire Vedic process is not meant to increase one's material activities. Nivrittarishta, the objective of the Veda is to bring you to the point of no animal flesh eating. In fact, no meat eating, no intoxication, no sex, no gambling. This is what is meant to bring one to. Until then, if one cannot come to this point, then within Varnashrama Dharma, there is restricted meat eating in the form of these animal sacrifices, through animal sacrifices. Restricted form of intoxication through certain sacrifices, somayagas. Restricted sex life through marriage, and restricted gambling under certain circumstances. But unrestricted versions of these activities are absolutely forbidden. But even the restricted versions are only meant for a particular point in time, and they always accompany with a statutory warning, just as in practically every country in the world, it is recognized that smoking is a very dangerous activity. It is not a crime. You're not put in jail for smoking. If you murder, you're put in jail. But if you smoke, you're not put in jail. But nevertheless, there is a lot of statutory warnings. Smoking is injurious to health. Smoking is injurious to health. Smoking is injurious to health, and so on. So, like that, adharma is criminal activity from the perspective of the cosmic system of governance. The Supreme Lord's method of dealing with this universe through the demigods, adharma is punishable activity. Whereas all these activities which are allowed in the Vedic scriptures, marriage is allowed, animal sacrifices, Vedic animal sacrifices, and restricted form of gambling under certain circumstances, drinking during Somayaga and so on. These are all allowed activities. These are kamya karma. But they are given in the Vedas along with statutory warnings. These are injurious to health. These are injurious to health. These are injurious to health. Take it at your own risk. We will not put you in jail, but you are going to suffer a lot. But foolish souls, they don't care for these things. They will simply jump into it. They will think that this actually is dharma. This is my God-given right. But actually speaking, the real fact we learn from the Upanishads is that it's only through renunciation, through internal detachment and external renunciation, that you make spiritual progress. But materialistic people, they don't think like that, like the Mimamsakas. They think that the renounced order of life is meant for people who are blind, lame, people with some corporeal defects, some bodily defects, or for people who are losers. It is for them that sannyas and so on is being presented in the Vedic scriptures. They think like that. But that is wrong. Strictly speaking, the Mahabharata and in all other scriptures, there is a description of the highest purpose of life. For instance, in Mahabharata, that is the Bhagavad Gita. But people who are materialistic, they do not uh, understand that Bhagavad Gita is central teaching of the Mahabharata. Even today in India and around the world, people do not generally understand that the principal topic of Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. And Narada Muni considered that Vyasadeva had assumed a compromising spirit and therefore he is chastising him. Vyasadeva wanted him to chastise and therefore he is chastising. Vichakshanosyar hati veditum vibho anantaparasya nivrititah sukham pravartamanasya gunairanatmanas tato bhavan darshaya cheshtatam vibho. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality, retired from the activities of material happiness, deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. This is a complicated subject. Unless one is factually detached from material activities, one will not be able to understand the reality of spiritual variegatedness that coexists with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And such a person who can understand the various internal details about the Supreme Absolute Truth, such a person is very, very rare. Manushyānām sahasreshu kaśchid yatati siddhaye yatatāmapi siddhānām kaśchin māṁ veti tattvataha. Kaśchin māṁ veti tattvataha. Similarly, Bhagavad Gita also. Brahmabhuta prasannātma na shochiti na kāṅkshati samasarveshu bhūteshu madbhaktim labate para. Bhaktya māṁ abhijanati yāvānyascha-asmi tattvataha. Tato māṁ tattvataha gyatva vishate tadanantaram. One who is a Krishna Tattva Vetta, one who knows Krishna in truth, is a very, very rare soul. He is a Prema Bhakta. Only such a person can factually describe the Supreme Personality of Godhead correctly. Narada Muni is indicating that Vyasadeva is such a person, and Shukadev is also such a person. So he is pointing out that you must describe this. Why should you do it? Because people should hear about the Supreme Lord's activities and associate with him and become pure. And that description should be absolutely spotless. It should be spotless, meaning that you don't describe Krishna's pastimes the way you describe them in the Padma Purana and the other Puranas, where you're simply obsessed with how to help them achieve dharma or artha or kama or moksha, and therefore you slant the Supreme Lord's pastimes in such a manner that they can get those goals. No, don't do that. Present Krishna as he is. Because Krishna appears, we will learn from Kunti's prayers, Krishna appears so that people can get Prema Bhakti. So for those who are interested in the fifth goal, for them. So he wanted a book to be written for them. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his subsequent followers exhibited expert dexterity in this connection, in presenting such a subject matter for today's Kali Yuga people. Chaktva sudharmam charanamrujam harer bhajanna pakvot patitato yadi yatra kvava bhadram abhudamushya kim kovartha apto bhajatam swadharmata. One who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in the devotion service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage. Yet there is no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. There are so many duties in Varnashrama Dharma. One may not execute them correctly, and he may fall down. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, Srila Jiva Goswami discussed this verse. One might become destructive, like Bharat Maharaj, one might commit an offense like Chitraketu. So when one engages when one gives up all of one's material activities, material duties, not just kamya karma, optional duties, but also his daily and periodical and circumstantial duties. He gives up everything. He gives up everything. And he just engages in devotion service. Of course, he is given up adharma also. But in an immature stage, he dies or he falls back, he deviates. Then what? Will he not get into a disaster? What Sridhar Swami points out is even if he falls into a state of disaster, strictly speaking, he will not fall into a state of disaster. But let us say he falls into he's punished in his next life with the lower birth or so on. If he's a bhakti rasika, if he is a connoisseur of bhakti, if he actually likes the activities of Navavidha bhakti, if he likes the activity of bhakti, bhajana kriya, then what exactly is what problem is such a person going to face? What inauspiciousness will he face? Because he still has that desire to engage in the activities of bhakti, bhajana kriya. So no inauspiciousness will happen even if he gets the material reaction for what he has done. That is why Prabhupada says, in spite of all this, the stress is given here to surrendering unto the lotus feet of the Lord, even if there is a chance of falling down, meaning that falling down in one's species or in one's material status. Because even though one falls down from the prescribed duties of devotion service, he will never forget the lotus feet of the Lord. Ajamil, for instance, in his early age, he was engaged in the activity of Bhajana Kriya. So Bhagavatam explicitly supports this idea that fully engage in bhakti, fully engage in, throw away not just dharma, throw away all forms of lower forms of dharma also, if you do it without duplicity. सवै पुंसां परो धर्मो यथो भक्तिरथोक्षजे अहैतुक्य प्रतिहता ये आत्मा सुप्रसीदति. If you can engage haituki apratihata, unmotivated and uninterrupted bhajana kriya, the 64 forms of devotional service, even if you are going to fall later on because you can't sustain it, or you're punished because you have given up that which you are meant to have done, you have given up certain forms of material dharma that you are meant to have done, carried out, still you will not suffer spiritually. Materially you may suffer, that's okay, but spiritually you will not suffer. And one who is serious about spiritual progress will not care for the material disadvantages. तस्यैव हेतो प्रयतेत कोविदो न लभ्यते यद् भवताम् उपर्यदः तल्लभ्यते दुःखवद् अन्यतः सुखं कालेन सर्वत्र गभीररमणः. Persons who are actually intelligent and philosophically inclined should endeavor only for that purposeful end, which is not obtainable even by wandering from the topmost planet Brahmaloka down to the lowest planet Patala. As far as happiness derived from sense enjoyment is concerned, it can be obtained automatically in course of time, just as in course of time we obtain miseries, even though we do not desire them. Srila Sridhar Swami points out that according to his karmic reactions from the ancient past, one attains various forms of distresses like experience of hell and so on. And just as they come by the force of his previous karma, similarly, by the force of one's previous karma, one will also attain material happinesses, because we generally engage in a combination of pious activities and impious activities, either knowingly or unknowingly. So therefore, both of them are going to yield their results. So why should you unnecessarily waste your time in obsession with the spirit of obsession for in attaining material happiness It is anyway going to come to you from your own karmic queue. So this is the spirit with which one is meant to engage in bhakti yoga. Therefore, Narada Muni points out this. When we talk about bhakti, we should remember Upadeshamrita of Rupa Goswami. That is bhakti yoga. Its starting point itself is very clear that it has got nothing to do with fulfillment of the six urges. It is the very opposite of that. Prabhupada here points out that even in this life, one attains good education or money by good work. Similarly, in our next birth, we get such desirable positions only by good work. Otherwise, it would not so happen. The two persons born in the same place at the same time are seen differently placed according to previous work. But all such material positions are impermanent. Miseries and mixed happiness are two features of material life, and they're obtained in Brahmaloka and other lokas also. They're obtained in the life of the demigods and also in the life of the dogs and hogs. Everyone has his distinct happiness. No one can get more or less of these things simply by personal endeavors. Even if they are obtained, they can be lost again. So the point is, one should not therefore waste time with these flimsy things. One should only endeavor to go back to Godhead. That should be the mission of everyone's life. Navai jano jatu kathanchana vrajen mukunda sevyan vaddanga samsritim smaran mukundang kripa guhanam punar vihatamikshen na rasagraho janaha. That Vyasa, even though a devotee of Lord Krishna, sometimes falls down. Somehow or other, he certainly does not undergo material existence like others, meaning fruitive workers, etc., the karmis, jnanis, or yogis. Because, or of course, atharmic people. Because a person who has once relished the taste of the lotus feet of the Lord can do nothing but remember that ecstasy again and again. So this is a point that continues from the previous description, that there is no inauspiciousness for one who has given up everything and simply he's engaging in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So he does not, he's not like a karmi, he's not like a pious worker. He is categorically distinct because he has embraced the lotus feet of Lord Mukunda. So he does not wish to give it up. So this is what is referred to as the Bhakti Rasika. Somebody who has experienced Bhakti Rasa, in the sense that somebody who is eager to experience the happiness of devotional service. He has experienced something. Kleshagni, Shubhada, Moksha Lagatakrit, Sudurlabha, Sandrananda Visheshatma, Shri Krishna Karshani Chasa. These are six features of pure devotion service. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So when we engage in the activities of even pure sadhana bhakti, we experience its result instantly. So that experience is what is referred to as, at least it is a reflection of bhakti rasa. At least it's that much. But one experiences that. So when there is a devotee of the Supreme Lord who has that experience and he has a desire to come to Prema Bhakti, then the Supreme Lord deals with him very differently. He is like a beloved son of a rich man. He is different, where he's categorically different from the karmis, jnanis, yogis, who may engage in the process of bhakti for a different purpose altogether. A devotee of the Lord, due to wrong association, sometimes imitates the fruitive workers. Sometimes devotees, due to unnecessarily mixing with non-devotees, they put themselves into various forms of distress by developing material desires and so on. If they are fortunate, then the Supreme Lord himself smashes their plans and brings them back. If they are not that much fortunate, then when he endeavors again, then he is attracted. And for this purpose, in Bhagavad Gita it is stated that the Shuchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Bhrashto Vijayate. He is given birth in the family of highly qualified brahmanas or a rich mercantile family. But the one who is chastised by the Supreme Lord in one very life and brought to his lotus feet, he is more fortunate. But this other person, he is less fortunate, but he is fortunate to some degree. Pure devotional service is so spiritually relishable that a devotee becomes automatically uninterested in material enjoyment. That is a sign of perfection in progressive devotional service. A pure devotee continuously remembers the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna and does not forget him even for a moment, not even in exchange for all the opulence of the three worlds. This is straight from Srila Jiva Goswami's Krama Sandarbha, where he is referring to the 11th canto description of the Uttama Vaishnava. There is a very detailed description of an Uttama Vaishnava. There's only one verse which describes the Kanishta Vaishnava, one verse which describes Madhyama Vaishnava, but there are several verses which describe an Uttama Vaishnava. This comes in the conversation with the Navayogendras. Jiva Goswami brings it up to point out that in the ultimate state it is like that. So there, the idea is that even earlier on, one has a little bit of that. One has a little bit of that. All right, I'll stop with that. Any questions? Otherwise, we will close up. If anyone has any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we will close up. Very interesting section in Bhagavatam. The commentaries are very good. Sridhar Swami, Jiva Goswami, Vishnu Chakravarti. Actually, Baladev Vidyabhushan has also given a commentary for the first canto. I haven't consulted all these commentaries because we don't have much time. So I have to be very limited. Okay, no questions? All right, thank you very much. Very close. All right, thank you very much. I'll stop the recording and I will close this.